Hi everyone, welcome to the GFP webinar on synergy hacking. I'm Jessie. So I guess the reason you're here is that synergy is a huge topic in ISAC and you're wondering how this webinar can actually add value to your current synergy. So if you've ever wondered about whether the frequency of your synergy routine actually changes the effectiveness of your implementation, what the biggest bottlenecks for synergy in the network are, stay tuned to this webinar because we'll be exploring a lot about that, as well as what kind of things that we can actually do, certain tips and so on, and how to actually improve our synergy. So that is what you can expect from this webinar. So without further ado, let's go into it. So the first thing is that just to give you a bit of a background about this project that we have, what we did in October is that we launched in the GFP survey some questions to actually um, ask all of you the reality of running your product synergy. So the perspective purely comes from the finance network, and because this education is catered on how we can actually improve, but I think you can take it also as more of like a general understanding of how synergy can be. So the things that we looked into is synergy bottlenecks, effectiveness, as well as KPI and MOS. So because the term bottleneck and effectiveness can be a bit general, we further broke down synergy into a few different elements. So objective goal setting, planning, implementation, routine and frequency, individual role, team accountability, and that gives us overall synergy. So the respondents were the 100 entities who responded to that specific month's GFP survey. So yeah, all our data is based on that. So jumping right into the data, we'll see that the main finding, the first thing is that based on the synergy element, we asked entities to rate what they considered to be their biggest bottlenecks, their moderate bottlenecks, their least bottlenecks, and not a bottleneck. So we didn't restrict you in how you actually rated the elements. So more than one element could be rated similarly. So there are a few interesting things here that we can note. The first is that already you can see a very huge amount or percentage of people here who actually voted, who considered objective or goal setting not to be a bottleneck. Whereas in terms of the highest, moderate, or biggest bottleneck, it actually goes into implementation and frequency. So already here we can kind of see a pattern where entities kind of have a smooth time in synergy and where things start to get a bit tricky. So it starts to get tricky during implementation as well as routine or frequency. So yeah, that's something just the first thing that we can actually see from here. So going a bit more deeper into each element. So the first thing that we can see here is that for implementation and routine frequency, you can see that out of 100 entities, 20% of entities actually consider implementation to be their biggest bottleneck, and 45% will actually consider it to be a moderate bottleneck. Whereas for routine and frequency, 18% of entities would consider this to be the biggest bottleneck, and 37 consider it to be a moderate bottleneck. So all in all, something that we can actually see from here is that more than 50% of entities consider synergy implementation and frequency to be problematic. And something interesting is that there were specifically 8 entities which had these two elements as simultaneously their biggest bottlenecks. So it means that it wasn't one or the other, but it was both of these things which were their biggest bottlenecks. So conversely, a majority of entities considered all these other 4 elements to be a least bottleneck or not a bottleneck. So not so much of an issue. More than 50% in general, they are pretty okay with these aspects. Yeah. So the next part of our study is that we actually asked about accountability level. So the following statement was given: the synergy team keeps each other accountable to the deliverables and goals. So majority of entities, if we consider 4 or 5, a score of 4 or 5 to be a good accountability level, we'll see that most entities actually responded, um, more than half responded that it was actually 4 or 5, and while the other half actually had a moderate to a low accountability level. So this is pretty interesting because it kind of means that the data is kind of split in half here, like half say it's good and half just say that it's moderate to not good. So just this data alone doesn't really tell us much, and that is why you'll see that throughout the next parts of the study, we actually showed a lot more data about the correlation as well. Uh, So the next part of the study, we looked at synergy effectiveness. So again, it's based on these individual synergy elements. We asked entities to rate what was their very effective, effective, ineffective, and very ineffective um, synergy elements. So yeah, I think there's some interesting things here that we can actually go through. So the first thing is that in general, majority of entities consider goal setting, planning, and accountability to be effective or very effective. So here, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So implementation, you can see that the pie chart is basically split right into half. So what we actually did is that looking at this data, seeing how interesting it actually is, we actually did further studies on the correlation between implementation and other factors. So if you are curious about that, don't quit the webinar. Keep on watching and keep on reading. Okay. So compared to the other synergy elements, for routine and frequency, there was, even though there was a slightly higher percentage of for ineffective, but overall majority of entities here, just a slight majority here, still considered to be effective or very effective. So again, this is just a question of asking entities to practice your own self judgment in rating it. So something that is missing from the pure data here is a bit of the context as well. So how we got context from entities is asking a few more open-ended questions within the survey itself and through the correlations and the inferences that we drew based on that. So overall, entities still considered synergy to be effective or very effective. So then the next part is that we actually something we looked into is frequency, because so far we've talked about frequency like a couple of times, but we haven't actually yet defined what we mean by frequency. So we break it down into four different kinds. So in terms of frequency, it means having either a weekly routine, a routine once every 2 weeks or fortnightly, a monthly routine, or the entity does not have a routine and the meeting only happens when it is needed, when someone calls for the meeting. Okay, so other than the fact that other than this not having a routine in general, I would say whether it's monthly, like once every 2 weeks or once every week, the frequency for the routine, it can actually depend on product maturity as well as your meeting objectives and so on. So but in general, something that we do learn is about the importance of having an actual routine. Okay, so we'll go through that right now. So the thing that we looked into for correlation, the first thing is looking into frequency as well as the effectiveness of all the five elements here. So the question that we ask ourselves is, if we have a different frequency or routine for synergy, how does that change the effectiveness of, for example, my synergy planning or implementation and so on. So that's something that we actually looked into, and the results I think are actually quite interesting. So in terms of routine frequency and goal setting effectiveness, you can actually see that there's no clear correlation, because if you look at the data, if my frequency is on a weekly basis, entities rated that goal setting is effective, right? But even if it's 2 weeks or even if it's monthly, you see that the data doesn't, it's not too far from each other. Not too far from each other. The difference or the gap is not that significant. So the differences in the frequency still result in effective goal setting. So something that we can infer is that in terms of having an effective goal setting that does not depend on your frequency, but possibly more clarity in your synergy role and objective, because maybe goal setting is something that you do at the very start of your synergy. So what happens in your routine afterwards, maybe it does not have so much of an effect on that, right? So but the next part is about planning. So something that we do see is that having any kind of routine at all, it would have a positive change in your synergy planning effectiveness. So what we imply here is that like planning of strategies and deliverables, it works best when you have a routine. So any kind of routine, it shows that planning would be effective or very effective, but the best is still when there is a weekly routine. Okay, so monthly gives it about a positive effect of 15. For every 2 weeks is about 18. and for weekly it's already 24. So that is already the majority here. So just by having a routine, you're already ensuring that your planning effectiveness is positive. But by having a consistent weekly routine, it will be the most effective. So that's something for you to consider here. In your finance routines with the other functions, how frequent is your routine? And of course, like what is the content of the routine? It doesn't just mean that I just schedule a weekly meeting and from that I assume or it will guarantee that my synergy will be effective already. Like of course there should be work put into it. But in general, if you do it in the right way, this should be the result that you get. Yeah. So the third thing is in terms of frequency and the effectiveness of implementation. Even with frequent synergy, it's not an assurance of the effectiveness of implementation, because if you look at the data here, that you'll see that with weekly synergy, the effectiveness is about the positive one is about a 14, but for the negative one is about a 16. So pretty much it's kind of split into half again. So this something that we can infer from here is that implementation might be affected by other factors, and that is something that we further explored as well in later slides. But for now, implementation, not so much of an effect. So the fourth thing is in terms of routine and frequency. By having a more frequent routine, does that actually make your routine more effective? So something that we do see is that yes, it does actually affect it a bit more positively, and this could be from the fact that when you have an established routine, an agenda, it makes the routine more effective. So let's say, for example, when you're used to having it something on a more consistent basis, um, or when if you start doing something as a habit on a, like every day or every week, naturally it's easier for you to actually carry out that task compared to, let's say, a routine, which is when you do it only once a month or once a quarter. Sometimes you're still not used to doing it, or there's a lack of focus, or maybe synergy topics can accumulate in for the discussions, right? So in general, this is what we can actually see here. And for the last part, for team accountability, it does show that in general, if you have a higher frequency for synergy, it does have an effect on the effectiveness of your team accountability as well. So in general, something that we can say is that when you have a more frequent routine, it helps you to create the environment to promote team accountability. Because maybe in a weekly routine, for example, there's a space for you to ask questions. Why is this thing done? Why is it not done? What support do you need from the team, and what is the way forward? So naturally, that already helps to foster an environment of accountability. So, of course, one of the limitations of this study is that we did not assess the consistency of the routines. So, entities are free to say that they have a weekly routine, but in terms of checking that they consistently keep up with the weekly routine, or whether they miss their routine sometimes, this is something that was not assessed. So there could be outliers of the correlation as well, just to take note. Yeah. So the next thing, just as a summary, is that you see that when you have a more frequent synergy routine, it does positively influence the effectiveness of three different things, which is your planning, the routine of frequency, and the team accountability. So let's say if you're having an issue of you feel that your synergy planning is not very effective, or maybe the team accountability. So something for you to look into is with what is your current synergy routine, and how maybe by tweaking that or changing that, it can actually help to change your effectiveness as well. Yeah. So the next part that we look at is synergy implementation. So like I said, like in earlier in the pie chart, we saw that the effectiveness of synergy implementation was basically split into half. So like what does that say? Like in terms of like bottlenecks and effectiveness. So we actually correlated this with the other elements of synergy to understand that, let's say if would the effectiveness of my goal setting or the planning or the routine actually change the effectiveness of my implementation, right? So the first part for goal setting, you'll see that there is a positive correlation, which is if I have an effective or very effective goal setting, naturally my implementation becomes effective or very effective as well. So this is the majority here compared to what is ineffective. So conversely, if my goal setting is ineffective or very effective, then my implementation is more likely to be ineffective as well. So this goes to show that when you don't have a very clear goal or KPI, it makes it very difficult to ensure consistent synergy implementation as well, or like effective synergy implementation. So you're more likely to have like bottlenecks and to somehow to have the synergy fall apart in some way. So the second thing is that very interestingly, based on the open-ended question that we asked you to list down certain KPI or MOS, there were around 8 entities that did not list down any KPI or MOS. So I think this is um, if this is the case for you, if you don't have a very clear KPI and MOS, not having a very clear goal setting would definitely make it hard for you to have a very effective implementation. So this is something for you to look into. Or if you have an KPI but you feel that it can be improved somehow, that is something that we will explore later as well. So the next part is when it comes to implementation and planning. Again, it is a very similar trend to what we saw in the previous slide, which is when you have effective or very effective planning, your implementation will also be effective. And when you have ineffective planning, your implementation will be ineffective. So what we can infer from here is that when you have a clear planning with timeline and individual roles, it makes it so much easier for you to implement, right? Because all these things are already everyone has a very clear idea of in terms of expectations and in terms of how things should be done. So the third thing, again, it is a similar trend where we see when you have an effective routine, your implementation will be effective. And when you have an ineffective routine, your implementation will also be ineffective. So routine and implementation are some things which are always linked together, because when you have a good routine, that sets the pace for you to implement very effectively and to keep the team accountable as well. So something to look into if that is an issue that you're facing right now. And for the final thing for team accountability, again, it is the exact same pattern. When your team accountability is effective and when there's a high accountability, you have a higher effectiveness for implementation. And when it is ineffective, your implementation will also be ineffective. So yeah, so it shows that there is a very clear correlation with all these different elements. So if your synergy implementation is an issue in your entity, things that you can actually look into improving your finance synergy is the objective or goal setting, the planning, the routine and frequency, and also team accountability. So these are the four things that you can actually look into to improve your finance synergy implementation. Right. So if you're curious about the data that we've used so far, and you want to do your own maybe inferencing process, maybe feel free to go to this link. It's where all the raw data that we collected is, and there's also a tab for all the consolidated data, which is where I extracted all the data for the tabs and all the pie charts and the graphs and so on. You can find it in this link here. Yeah. So yeah, so I think at this point of the webinar, I will have everyone to maybe take out your paper and your pen, or like what journal you have, and to maybe list down 2 or 3 things that you actually conclude from this data. So what are your main takeaways from this data that you think that can actually help you to actually improve your synergy from this point on? So pause this video right now and just take a quick minute to do that. So if you're ready to move on to the next part, so let's take a moment to reflect on our current synergy. So far in the webinar, we've talked a lot about all the technical parts of like planning and implementation and having a routine. So all these things are things which are just more on the human action or behavior aspect. So now let's take a look at more of the mindset of synergy, right? So how do you think that your current synergy is? If you can take a moment to reflect on that, like whether you think that the mindset that everyone is bringing in, is there something that we can improve on as well? So I remember when I was a member, when I just joined ISEC, and my team leader was teaching me about synergy. I think it was probably one of the first times that I've heard someone use the word synergy. um, I actually Googled synergy to understand a bit more about how the internet defined it. And something very interesting is that I saw this image of it was just numbers, which is 1 plus 1 equals to 3, and a lot of people seem to be using that in the synergy context. So I looked more into that, and I discovered something interesting. the theory of synergy mathematics. So let's just go through that uh, briefly to understand like what kind of mindset that we actually should bring into synergy. So in the first kind of synergy situation, you'll see that the first mathematical equation here is 1 plus 1 equals to 1. So in this kind of synergy situation, you see that one person usually dominates the discussion to achieve their own objectives. So, but then the other person or the other party in the synergy contributes or receives nothing in return. So in this kind of situation, it can happen when the synergy team is not prioritizing the team needs, just about themselves. So maybe it's just that you feel that you don't have enough time, so you want to quickly meet your synergy counterpart, just say that you want to say and get the hell out of there. Or maybe the other person is feeling that way. So in this kind of situation, what you can observe is a kind of person called a shunner. So the shunner shuns other people's opinions and ideas. They just want to get away from that, right? And they're not happy when people have differences in opinions. So in this kind of situation, one person is usually more dominant, and the synergy is not really a synergy at all, right? 1 plus 1, you're not even getting a 2 here. So in the next situation, you'll see that it's a bit better, but still not as good as it can be. So you have a compromise. So 1 plus 1, you get more than 1, but you still get less than 2. Okay? So one person achieves their objective and things are going their way, but the other person maybe only achieves partial satisfaction. So they're not fully satisfied, but they're halfway there. So in this sense, it means that they're tolerating. They're not really happy about the differences or the conclusion that the team wants to take, but they're kind of like, yeah, it's fine, whatever, I'll just tolerate it. You know, you do what you want, I'll just do my own thing, right? So they may be not so open to share their opinions, and they're just tolerating what is happening. So again, it's not ideal. It's a bit better than what we had earlier, but it's not. It can be better as well. So in the third situation, at the very least here, you finally get a 2, right? So 1 plus 1 equals to 2. And in natural maths, that is correct, right? So what happens here is that both sides achieve their objective within the discussion. And there's a bit more harmony to ensure that each party, at the very least, they say what is on their mind and they achieve what they need to achieve. But there are two situations that can occur in cooperative synergies. The first thing is ignorance. So this is when a team is still unsure about what they want to achieve as a team, and they're only clear on what they want to achieve individually. Yeah, so they're achieving individually but not together as a team. So, and the second situation is complacency. So the team becomes complacent and a bit more lazy about synergy. So especially if your synergy routine is a lot more mature, like maybe you've already had a routine for around 6 months or so, and everything is already like natural, like it just comes so smoothly to you. So you're just having discussions as normal, but you're not really challenging each other anymore because you're just doing it for the sake of, yeah, it's a habit, it's a routine, it's a behavior. I'm not thinking much about it. So, but ideally, if we talk about synergy, ultimately where we want to be is 1 plus 1 equals to 3, because this is a situation where the team is the most clear about what you want to achieve collectively as a team, and everything is done to fulfill the team's needs. So in this case, the synergy is more than the sum of its parts. So 1 plus 1 doesn't just equal to 2. You actually get something extra out of that, which is 3, which is the ultimate goal of synergy. Everyone benefits, and you create new solutions or new ways to solve the problems as well. So this kind of situations can apply when your synergy is just one-to-one, for example, finance and just your MCPTM, or whether your synergy is in a bigger setting, for example, a whole product team meeting. So all these situations can be applied there, and that's something for you to start thinking about, like how, if you want to improve your synergy, how can that happen? So improving synergy doesn't just mean improve it so that finance can get a better deal out of the synergy, but ultimately it's also understanding what the contribution for finance is to improve the synergy as a whole. So I think that is a very clear difference on what are the things that we actually want to achieve, right? So once we are clear on the mindset that we need to bring into synergy, what we'll go through next is just a very quick example. I won't go too deep into this. I'm simply using this example because I personally love orchestras a lot, and I think that we can actually take a lot of lessons from how an orchestra conducts themselves. So all of the things of orchestra, you see that an orchestra is original. So orchestras exist all over the world. Um, like there's always like a national orchestra in your country as well, maybe. And so every orchestra plays similar music, right? You can play pieces, classical music like from Mozart, from Bach, but every orchestra kind of has their own style to play it, for example. So in the case for synergy, how we can relate that is that what kind of expectations are you bringing into each different synergy team? Because maybe you get a good case practice from another entity, or maybe because you have um, a synergy with IGV, you can't really expect the synergy for TM to go the exact same way, right? So are you adapting to the needs of each team? So each synergy team consists of different people, so the dynamics can be different as well. So how well are you adapting to that? So the second thing is that in an orchestra, it's not about the competition, right? You're not trying to compete about who is the best musician here. The most important thing is to make sure that the music sounds good and you give your best performance of your life every single night. So how are you ensuring that everyone in your team gets what they need from the synergy, and like one plus one equals three, right? So synergy only works when everyone benefits. So yeah, so the third thing is in terms of individual effort. In an orchestra, only the pianist plays the piano, only the drummer plays the drum, only the violinist plays the violin. So everyone has their own contribution. So as finance, what is your unique contribution to the synergy team? So you provide that perspective with which other people might not understand in terms of, for example, risk management, legalities, governance, financial sustainability. So not everyone in your synergy team will understand all these things. So that is where your unique contribution comes in. And there are also things that you may not be able to bring or to understand, and other people bring that into the synergy. So when everyone has a very unique perspective and you combine all of these different things together, that creates the most holistic picture for you to have the best synergy as well. So I think that's something for you to be very clear on your own role, and also to understand what is the role of the other person. If you understand what is the role from the other person, it makes it easy for you as well to ask them questions and to get information from them in the synergy, right? So in terms of a team effort, for sure, an orchestra is a team effort. That is why you have it's not just a band of like one guitar, one drum, right? Usually in orchestras, you have a whole section where you have a whole section of violinists or a whole section of clarinets. People play same instruments, right? So once we are clear on our individual role in synergy, don't get too obsessed with what only we do, but really make sure that you can keep other people accountable and you know what other people should be doing as well. So that when you go into your synergy meeting, you're not just reporting what you did for that week, but you can also understand what that person did and what they should have done if they didn't do it, for example, and that is how you can keep them accountable. But if you have no idea what the other person is supposed to do, then the meeting just serves your own need of reporting, but you're not really moving the synergy forward, for example. And finally, an orchestra, you have a conductor. So who is the one who's setting the tempo in your synergy team? So is your MCP playing a role in tracking the product or tracking your synergy? And um, if you have a synergy team leader, is this person driving the progress of the team as well and helping to keep accountability in the team? So that's something for you to consider. And if you don't have all these things, it's maybe time to start thinking about how all these things can be reviewed and maybe improve for your future synergies, right? So clear way forward for your entity. For sure, you will have a synergy framework of some sort. What we have in the screenshot here should be the version that you receive in your very first MC planning tool, back when you were just elected. So uh, if you're using this or if you're using something else, just make sure that if you have your synergy framework, make sure to use it, right? So this is tied very closely in terms of synergy goal setting and planning. When you have a very clear plan, it makes your synergy implementation effective, remember, from the data. So make sure that you can use something like this as well. So I'll give an example of how it can be. So something that I want to emphasize here is that it is just an example. um, if you have um, maybe an example which is better, yeah, that is completely fine. But if you feel that if it's something that you want to use as a reference to improve your current framework, feel free to use that as well. But also please make sure that you consider the reality of your entity and adapt it based on that. Okay, so when we talk about objective, again, it means just having a very clear outcome that you collectively want to achieve by the end of, let's say, the semester or the term. And make sure that you are very and everyone has a very clear understanding of this collectively as well, right? So the next thing is in terms of having a very clear role and a very clear goal. um, for sure, I think everyone would have a different role and have a different goal here. But something to remember is that the main synergy outcome is to grow the product and to achieve exchange and financial goals. So yeah, and in terms of routine, one thing that I do want to challenge is that rather than being very fixed on the mindset that I must make a choice whether it's weekly or fortnightly or monthly, maybe think of it in a different way that um, the routine is just uh, different points of times where you discuss different topics, right? So let's look at the example right away. So I think for product and finance, it's a bit more clear cut just because it's a bit more clear what to discuss. Objectives usually are about to discuss product performance and also like to firefight any bottlenecks related to product achievement. So let's say in the case for products like IGV, KPI is very clear for your IGV product head or your synergy counterpart. It's always like applied, approved, realized, and things like that. And for finance, it's about product sustainability levels. It's about implementation of your investment plan, the budget versus actual, profit margin, revenue growth. So all these things can be very, very clear. And but when it comes to back office, sometimes this is where the confusion is. So what do I discuss with my TM? What do I discuss with my OD? For sure, there are very clear things that you can discuss. So for example, a synergy with talent management can just be about how you evaluate the effectiveness of your membership strategy. So how do you ensure that your membership experience in your entity is a good one? Right? So something that you can discuss within your synergy is that from finance perspective is, for example, national investments related um, to talent management, right? So if it's about subsidization for members, members training, or maybe R&R, if you have some kind of R&R campaign, or if you have different things going on, um, or maybe you have I don't know, talent management, NSTs, and you want to invest in them somehow. Those are things that you will put as your finance KPI, right? And from a TM perspective, what could be included is, for example, in the finance commission, what is the percentage of L&D implementation? So how well are we educating our LCVPs? Or how well are our LCVPs educating their members, for example? Team standards implementation, PDP, L&D effectiveness. So the list goes on, but it's mainly more about how um, TM is providing a service to finance and finance is providing a service to TM as well. So I think that that can be a very clear topic for synergy. And when it comes to marketing, for sure, I think the thing about marketing is that it can get a bit technical, especially when it comes to things like pay per click, website bounce rate, and things like that. My suggestion here is that on your own free time, or maybe just spend a bit of time to actually read up a bit on the more technical parts of marketing. It's not, I wouldn't say it's compulsory, but I would say that if you understand the basics of digital marketing, it helps make your discussions for marketing synergy a lot more effective just because you would understand what they're talking about, and it makes it easier for you to understand, for example, the weekly achievements of website bounce rate or pay per click, whether those things are actually within an ideal benchmark. Like the numbers actually mean something to you because you understand the context of it, right? So that is my suggestion for marketing synergy, for you to do a bit of technical reading. And in terms of there's also a suggestion here in terms of what KPIs you can put. So again, the thing that I was saying about routine earlier is that to challenge the idea that it's just a choice between like it's either weekly or fortnightly or monthly. but having different topics for different kinds of routines. So let's say on a weekly basis, what you can discuss is having to track weekly deliverables or to firefight any proposed bottlenecks. But on a fortnightly basis, which is once every 2 weeks, maybe you just want to have a time to sit together on work or finalize certain kind of discussions or some projects that you're running together, for example. And on a monthly basis, maybe you do a review. And let's say for products, maybe on a quarterly basis, you want to audit the product. So let's say you want to have project audits for IGV or IGT and IGE audits or some sort of thing here. So have the routine is just a touch point at the end of the day. And so having very clear objectives for each touch point can help you make it effective or more effective overall. So yeah, that's basically the example I've given here again. The needs of each entity are very different. So rather than taking this example exactly, make sure that you have a space with your synergy people to understand what are the expectations, right? And um, the last piece of advice here is not to just push the responsibility of ensuring like the accountability and success of the synergy to the product head or your MCP, but really understanding that everyone should have the same level of ownership and have an equal role in ensuring accountability. So that's basically the end of the webinar. Hopefully, it helped to add value to your current synergy. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your coach from your GFB, or you can directly contact me as well. And all the best to everyone, and have a great day.